Matthew 6, verse 19 through 24. Lay up treasures in heaven. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
So when I started out my career, I had a little bit of a false start in recruitment. But during this time, a short period of only 6 weeks, I realized that maybe I should become an accountant, because I just really thought this is an amazing way to begin your career. You come out of university and you've learned all these things, and do they apply to what you are actually going to do? Definitely not in Europe sometimes. And I thought, wow, this is like a really structured way to get into a solid career. So I pursued accounting. And most accountants, you might know this, Darren definitely knows this, that most accountants go into audit when they start out their career. And for me, the way I remember it was I started in January, and it mostly involved me just like copying paper, and just printing paper and filling out files, and honestly warming my hands up on the copier because I was so cold that I was just so cold in that horrible suit, and it was awful. But back to audit. I was in audit, and I had to learn what this was. And I learned during this time that the word audit comes from the Latin audire, it doesn't really matter if you can't pronounce it because it's a dead language. So I'm right for the purposes of this sermon. But what an auditor's job is to do, and I know you guys have IRS audits and stuff like that. We don't have that so much in the UK, so I'm specifically talking about corporate audit, so entities. I did a lot of charities, not-for-profits. I did a lot of companies. But an auditor, this word audire means to listen. Because what the auditor's task is to do is to receive the financial statements from the company and check whether the statements match up to the reality. And in order to see that, what we need from the company is unfettered access to everything. There was only one circumstance in which I wasn't allowed access to everything, and I had to kind of agree to it. But it was actually to know the location of missionaries actually overseas in close countries. That was the only time where I didn't see something. But otherwise, I saw everything. I saw what they spent on coffee. I saw what they spent on marketing, how much they were charging for their products, what kind of margin they were making, salaries, benefits, HR correspondence, perhaps the most interesting of all of them. I just got to see absolutely everything, unfettered access. And what happens is when you see these things, you begin to see what a company really values and what their goals are, and what they prioritize, really. And that is what you see. And there is a phrase that we say in life, follow the money, and it is so true. Money tells you a lot about a company. And Jesus takes this exact idea in our passage, and he says these words, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And so what we are doing this morning is I want to invite you on a journey to examine the audit trail of your life. Your money tells a story about you. It tells what you value and what you treasure. As Jesus shows us, our treasure shows the placement of our hearts. It shows where our priorities live. But what do we do with this? That is exactly where Jesus begins. Jesus begins by contrasting two types of treasure. And Jesus gives instructions with a warning for one type of treasure and how to handle that, and an incentive for the other type of treasure. So let's read. In verse 19, Jesus tells us and prohibits us, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth. What does it mean to lay up? Well, literally, the word means to treasure. If you were to translate this in the most literal way, it would be treasure your treasures. We could say stash away, we could say save, we could say spend, we could say value. All of these things are captured within this word. It is a broad word. And the reason why this is so relevant is that we have like an accumulation mindset. That's kind of how we think. We're usually looking to add the next thing to our lives. We're always having to purchase new things, and we're always having to replace things. We have an accumulation mindset. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but hold that thought. What are these earthly treasures, though? What are they? They are your income, the paycheck that we celebrate getting every 2 weeks or month or whenever you get it, every week maybe. They are our assets. In the accounting world, we think of things as like income, assets, liabilities, and expenses. Income, the money that's coming in. Expenses, the things that are going out. Assets, the more kind of like long-term things that you have that you store. And liabilities, the things that you own, maybe that pesky student debt. So we're talking here specifically about treasures, about income really, we're going to include that, and assets. It's deliberately broad. It doesn't just relate to money. It could be your car, it could be your house, it could be your favorite piece of gym equipment, it could be your favorite kitchen gadget, it could be my beloved sound system. Lots of different things. And so what does Jesus say happens to these earthly treasures? That is the question. Well, he says moths and rust destroy them. I grew up in the countryside, and I remember in my chest of drawers we'd have these little plastic balls called mothballs. And I quickly learned that if you don't have the mothballs in the drawer, then what happens? The moths kind of like eat the fabric. I don't really know why. I'm not really sure why they want to eat it. I don't think it would be tasty to take a chunk out of this, but that's what they do. And then the other thing that Jesus says, the other problem with earthly treasures is rust. Now, I haven't been in the US for a super long time, but pretty early on, I learned that if you're buying a car, you probably shouldn't buy one that spent any decent amount of time in the Midwest. Why? Because it's wet. There's obviously oxygen, which you need for rust to occur. And then you've got all this salt on the road, which apparently we don't really use here that much. So don't buy a car from the Midwest, maybe. Or maybe you're from the Midwest, sorry about that, and you brought your car across. But the point is Jesus uses two illustrations that show us that earthly treasures, whether they are like long-term assets, things like a car that you will use for a really long time, built out of sturdy metal, or things that we will only use for a short period of time, like clothes, both of them are susceptible to deterioration and destruction. They are temporal things. They both destroy and deteriorate. Now, some of you out there might be more frugal. You might think, well, I've kind of like thought about it and I'm kind of like at peace with how things deteriorate. I plan for the maintenance on my car. I calculate exactly when I need to replace the boiler or the heating system. I'm cool with that. Like, I just accept that. I'm at peace with that. But then Jesus mentions thieves. When someone steals something from you, it's lost forever. It doesn't matter how much you took care of it. Something can be stolen 50 years after you bought it, or 50 days after you bought it. Theft can happen whenever. I think of two particular examples since I've been here in Denver. Things can be stolen when they have good security, and things can be stolen in the blink of an eye. I had one friend invite me over to try these really nice craft beers in Denver. He lived in an apartment in Baker, and he kindly invited me over. And as I was parking, he came out and helped me with the parking situation. It was a little complicated, so he's like, "Oh, you kind of park here," and like, yeah, that's probably the best spot. Took 2 minutes. He left the beers on the doorstep, gone. Someone just took them. Probably didn't realize how nice those craft beers were. I want to bet that they did not. Another guy that I knew at seminary parked his car, I believe, always like right in front of a security camera. One morning he woke up, he's going to work, he brushes his teeth, he showers, whatever, he does his routine. He walks downstairs, walks outside. Where's my car? Things can be stolen even when we think they're pretty secure. But locks are evidence. Whenever we see a lock, it is evidence that things can be stolen in our world. Things can go in the blink of an eye and be lost. So things that are earthly can be destroyed and they can be stolen. The point that Jesus is driving home with these three illustrations is that earthly treasures are transient. And you can add even the risk of inflation to these things. Anyone feel the drain on your purchasing power? Anyone feel like things cost too much over time? Yeah, add inflation to the list of things that will happen to your earthly treasures you will experience in this lifetime. Now, the early church, they had a way of kind of tackling this problem of accumulating earthly treasures. They said, okay, I got it. You know, Jesus tells me, do not accumulate things. So their approach was this thing called asceticism, essentially like rejecting material things, only keeping like literally the most basic things. It's actually a pretty like popular thing to do these days. You know, we got tiny homes and people kind of reading books about simplicity and all this kind of stuff. And so we do it now. But asceticism was their plan back in the day. And it went hand in hand often with monasticism. And monasticism was monks, like becoming a monk, separating yourself from the world. The idea was that if we reduced the amount of things we had and we removed ourselves from the world that even then felt quite consumeristic, then we would like be following Jesus' commands. But these were good intentions for holiness, good intentions that I believe miss the vision of what Jesus is trying to teach us. Because number one, like if you feel like you're not particularly rich, you feel like I'm not very rich, like I live quite simply, I have all of these things. What are you going to do with how are you going to think about the really few things that you do have? You're going to treasure them more, right, rather than less. Another thing about monasticism, this idea of removing yourself from society and not buying into the consumerism of the society, actually like reduce their opportunity to be what Jesus tells us to be in the Sermon on the Mount, salt and light, to be a distinctive presence witnessing the gospel to others. And so it is not that easy. So what is the goal? The goal is a healthy relationship with our treasures, not Gnosticism. What is Gnosticism? Gnosticism is usually something that, preachers pull out and they just, say it. But what it is the separation between the physical and the material, and it is a rejection of the physical, because only the spiritual things are important. But that, again, is not Jesus' vision for our lives. Jesus wants our lives to kind of look like, as I was thinking about this, a toolbox. He wants it to have an order and a placement. Everything needs to be in balance in our lives. We are not called to run away from things. We are called to embrace the tension, live in the material world while presenting the spiritual treasure of the gospel to others. And so what Jesus is calling us to is a different treasuring mentality. Like I said with accumulation, treasuring things is not bad in and of itself. We just need to treasure the right things. It is a question of emphasis. The point that Jesus wants to make is, do not store up earthly treasures as if they will fully satisfy and they will last forever. Store up for yourself heavenly treasures. Why? Because heavenly treasures never deteriorate and they can never be stolen. As I was thinking about things that can't be stolen, my mind went to some of the amazing infrastructure you guys have here in the States. And one of the things that I thought about was the Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Probably have if you're a native. Probably have if you're just interested in these kinds of things like me. But the Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Center has crazy blast doors that are super thick. It's buried deep underground. It sits on springs, so it's like earthquake proof. I don't think we have earthquakes here, but maybe I'll figure that out later. And it has its own power system. It is completely self-sufficient. But even something like this needs maintenance. The doors are eventually going to rust. The springs too, especially if they go through an earthquake. They're going to move around a bunch. They're going to need oil, like change it. I don't know what you do with springs, but you're going to need to replace them for sure. The power system. Anyone's AC ever gone out? I think they're going to need to replace the power system. All of these things are still at risk of deterioration. And what Jesus is saying is that will never happen to your heavenly treasures. What Jesus is putting before us is the ultimate investment opportunity. I don't know if your Insta feed has looked like mine sometimes, but I get these kind of like, the ultimate investment opportunity, and like, here's 5 steps to make $10,000 in 2 seconds, and you're like, you look into it and you're like, yeah, whatever. And so you should. They're all probably lying. But the investment opportunity that Jesus puts in front of us is genuinely the only ultimate investment. Because not only will there be no risk of deterioration, no risk of destruction or theft, but your heavenly treasure will only grow. That's what it does. Because the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that grows into a massive tree. Jesus will illustrate elsewhere. Now, again, back to this idea of physical things. We need physical things to function. We need temporal things. We can't opt out of our moneyed society. We need money to function. But again, the point of all of this is to have perspective. That is the big takeaway, is that we must have the right perspective. It is not a total prohibition on earthly treasures. Of course not. Like, you should have a toothbrush, please do. It is not a total prohibition on these things, but it is a question of perspective. Negative equity is a bad place to be in. I've never owned a home, but I know at least that negative equity is not a great place to be in, because it's when the mortgage you have left to pay exceeds the value of your home. So you're now in what we would say is a liability position in the accounting world. So negative equity is a terrible place to be in. And this is the warning that Jesus has for us. We must be careful about having an incorrect valuation of earthly and heavenly treasures. He's calling us to see heavenly treasures for the pricelessness and the untouchability that they have, and to see earthly treasures in their right place. What is required, and something that we all must do, is do a constant revaluation of earthly and heavenly treasures. Because if we don't pay attention to it, we will always prize the immediate earthly treasures over the far distant heavenly treasures, the things that we can't see and we can't touch. And so my first question for you to consider is, are you willing to do a revaluation? And you say to me, well, hang on a minute, you haven't really defined what is heavenly treasure. It's very elusive. It's very what are these things? Is it just something that kind of sits on the clouds? Like if I got up high enough in a plane, could I see the heavenly treasures? No, you couldn't. But what are heavenly treasures? Well, first of all, it is our salvation. Our salvation, that we are reconciled to God through the death, burial, and resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. Yes, for sure. But on top of that, it is the kind of life that we live in a response to that. It is the kind of work that the Spirit does in us as a result of our salvation, as a result of our new citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. Heavenly treasures are actually found all the way through the Sermon on the Mount. Heavenly treasures are kingdom living. Let me give you a few examples. We mentioned being salt and light. Witnessing to the gospel, sharing the gospel with others is one way you would be investing in heavenly treasures. Oaths, we talked about them a few weeks ago. Having integrity, being trustworthy and honest, sticking to your promises, laying up heavenly treasure. Enemy love, loving the people that really tick you off. The hardest people that you have in your life, loving them, heavenly treasure. Generosity of your time, of your money, of your resources, your assets, anything you own, giving away of those things, heavenly treasure. Prayer also, heavenly treasure, contending to the Lord for the good of our city, for the good of each other, and growing in relationship with Him, because you will be in relationship with Him forever if you are in Christ. And so praying is a beginning of that relationship. Fasting, exercising self-control, investing in your character by the power of the Spirit, also heavenly treasure. I could go on. It's all over Scripture, heavenly treasure. Now, I recognize that some of you here might not be a Christian. Kudos to you if you are here and you're not a believer. You wouldn't consider yourself a believer. I hated going to church before I was a believer. It took a lot for me to go to church, so I just love that you're here. It just genuinely fills my heart with joy. But if you are not a believer, the essential message that you should take away is that Jesus has something to offer that this world could never offer. Jesus offers you heavenly treasure, investing in things that last, and the character that you will grow in yourself, and the good works that you will do out of the salvation that is available to you. You can be saved today. You can come to faith today. If you would accept Jesus today, come and speak to me. Come and speak to Michael. We would love to hear about that. But what I want you to consider in this message is, what is this heavenly treasure? And why should I engage with it? So heavenly treasure, again, are things with eternal value that will only grow over time. They cannot be stolen. They cannot be destroyed. But how do we invest in heavenly treasure? Jesus gets to this by starting with the eyes. Look down in verse 22. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. What's up with that? When I read that for the first time, I thought, I don't know what this is all about. The eye is the lamp of the body. Well, when I looked into it a little bit more, I realized that actually in the ancient world, they believed the way you see things through your eyes is that your eyes kind of project light onto the object and shine it up for you. They light it up for you so that you can see. And so what Jesus does is he uses their understanding then of how the eyes works, and he uses it to make a point. And the point is that how we see the world impacts our experience. Take Team USA in the World Cup. If Team USA believes that they can win the World Cup, right? Most of the world, I'm sorry guys, they don't think you guys have a proper chance. But let's say Team USA, and I'm for them, they're my third favorite team. If Team USA really think, we believe we can do this, what's that going to impact? It's going to impact the way they train. They're going to train hard. They're going to run until they have nothing left. They're going to enter every tackle, every contested ball on the pitch when they're playing the game. And with that kind of energy, maybe they could actually win. Because I tell you what, if they don't believe that, they're definitely not going to win. They're not going to go that extra percent. And so Jesus wants to tell us a really important life principle, that how we see the world impacts our experience of the world. It doesn't guarantee results. If Team USA, great movie, no, actually don't watch it. Anyway, if Team USA don't believe that they're going to win, believe that they're going to win, if they believe that they're going to win, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to win, right? I mean, I hope that reality has sunk in, but go Team USA until they play England. Good luck with that. But Team USA must believe these things, and Jesus is saying the same. If we see straight, we will flourish and we will treasure the right things. It all begins with how we see things. How do we not lay up treasures on earth and we lay up treasures more on heaven than on earth? We need to start by seeing correctly. Because the opposite will happen otherwise. So it says, if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. So the principle is like the smaller thing, the eye, to the bigger thing, your body, which represents your whole life. And then the reverse is true. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great the darkness. The danger is, and Jesus never hides reality from us, the danger is if we see poorly, it'll be as good as walking in the dark. It won't be like me with my -2 contacts, and I can't really see very well if I don't have my contacts in. It won't be like that. It'll be a lot worse. It will be darkness. Why? Because God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. And so Jesus warns us, if you don't see properly, you will be walking in the dark. And the scary thing is that in verse 23b, it warns us that darkness can actually be mistaken for light. It's one thing to kind of know you're walking in the darkness. Like if I'm kind of like walking through the darkness to go and fill up my humidifier before I go to bed, and I'm just like, I can't be bothered to turn on the lights. I'll just, I kind of know the layout of my home, and I know that I'm walking in the darkness. That's not the situation here. It says, if then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? It's as if you have mistaken darkness for light. It matters what we look at, how we look at them, and value them. Because the real danger comes next. The irony is that we accumulate earthly treasures to serve us usually, or sometimes other people, but mostly to serve us, let's be real. We mostly accumulate earthly treasures to serve us. But the irony is that they instead will enslave us if we prioritize them over heavenly treasures. Treasure is not just an indicator of your heart placement, like where you would find your heart if you're looking for it. It's not just an indicator of where it is an influencer. Even more than that, Jesus uses the idea of a slave master. This question of treasure that we have for us this morning is a question of formation. In verse 24a, Jesus says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other." Treasure, if we focus on it too much, has real power over us because we are beings of devotion. See that word there? It says he'll be devoted to the one. The Bible uses this word worship. We are worshippers. When we treasure something, we worship it, and it begins to shape our lives. And so there is a warning in the second half of the verse. Now, in the World Cup, we've reached the bracket stage. Lots of World Cup references today. I wonder why England aren't playing or anything. But we've reached the bracket stage, and it is no longer like the regular season, to put it in Jarl's vernacular. It is now the knockout, the head-to-head. And so the warning is that sometimes we think that we can live with split loyalties. We think, oh yeah, I can kind of like, I'm all in on Jesus, but I do kind of like this, and I do like want to invest in this, and this is really important to me, and so I'm going to invest in this earthly treasure. But as long as Jesus is kind of like there, as kind of the primary person in my life, then we're good. Well, the warning is that Jesus says you can't do that. You cannot serve God and money. Life has a habit of producing bracket knockout situations where things go head to head in our lives. I saw it in recruitment as I would have discussions about location, salary, benefits, career progression, career title. You eventually found out, my job as a recruiter was to find out which one's the most important to them, so that when I present them and match them to the job, they're gonna take the job, and they're not gonna be like, oh, actually, like the pay's like way too low, and I'm like, oh, like that was way more important than I realized, dang, So life, likewise, has situations, not just when you are taking a job, but life has a habit of revealing our priorities. And Jesus specifically mentions one particular treasure: money. And I love that he mentions money, because so much of our discipleship, of our following Jesus, we're constantly wondering, well, how can I know that I'm growing in my discipleship? How patient am I? I mean, you can ask your friends, but they're just going to give you some kind of subjective idea. Maybe it's based on the last week or the last month. You can think about how loving you've been in the last while, but it's all just a little bit subjective. It's all a little bit qualitative. Important, but qualitative. Well, here we have the quantitative discipleship marker: money. Money is really important. As we were raising for fellow citizens, as we were going and building partnerships with people, one of the best things that someone said to me was when you go and ask someone for money, and I'm pretty comfortable with money. I was an accountant, I'm kind of somewhat, but asking someone for money, that's another level. But what someone said to me was actually money, when you engage in support raising, as they call it, you're actually engaging in a ministry of the heart, because as Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so what I want to propose to you is given that this is a quantitative discipleship marker, I want to tell you that you can actually do something practical as it relates to your discipleship. How do we evaluate the heart? Draw up a budget. If you don't have a budget, you should make one, not just because it's generally good advice to make a budget and keep track of stuff, but honestly, this is a really great way that you can apply the truths that Jesus is teaching right here. because your budget won't lie. A budget, for those of you who are less familiar, maybe haven't got around to that yet, you have the lines of your income, so your paychecks coming in, your interest income, the amount the money that you get back from storing your money in the bank, and then you have all these expenses: car maintenance, car insurance, rent payment, eating out budget, benevolence, like kindness to people, like hospitality, entertainment, you name it. Think of something that you spend money on. It should have a line in your budget. And so you can actually look at your money, and you can engage in discipleship just by drawing up a budget and looking at it. And what I want to encourage you to do is to do something that the Lord really laid on my heart as we got married, was to me and Anna, we draw up the budget together and we take some time aside to go and look at it. And we just think it's a really deeply spiritual activity. So we'll surround it in prayer, all of these things. And I want to encourage you to see a budget as more than this functional thing that you just kind of have to do and keep track of and whatever. Actually, it's deeply spiritual. Our fellow citizens, we have a budget. You can see what we value based on the line items and how much we assign to it in our budget. Take, for example, this very beautiful building that we live in. We do live in it, don't we? Yeah, we do live in it, yes. This beautiful building, we could have gone and found somewhere a lot cheaper, way out of Denver. It would have been easier for us. We're a church plant. We don't really want to spend, we don't want to tie down a huge amount of money into things. But we decided that we love Denver, and we want to be right in the middle of Denver. And we want to be a church that holds the ancient and the modern in tension. And so we would love to have a historic, beautiful building. And that's exactly what God gave us. And we felt called to go and spend that money to have this building. We clearly care about those things. That's why we made those decisions. Likewise with church planting, we invest in other church plants because we just don't want to be so fixated on our own little project of fellow citizens when we realize God's plans for church planting across the state, across the country, and the world are far bigger. And so our budget reveals things about us, and your budget reveals something about you, and my budget reveals something about me, what I value. And the warning is that money can inhibit. It can distract from the worship of God. And so Jesus wants us, again, to see clearly so that we are not enslaved in the darkness by our treasure. And so what is the solution? We need to treasure the right treasure, and it's right there at the end of verse 24. Which treasure should we treasure the most? Who should we serve? God, the true master. Money is a slave master. It will form you in the worst ways sometimes. It is contrasted with God, who is a good master. How do we know that he's a good master? Because he sent his son not to be served, but to serve. Every other master just demands service, demands. Money does too. You always need more of it to keep up. Jesus came not to serve, but to serve us. He is a servant-hearted master. So how do we treasure the true treasure? We fix our eyes on Jesus, serve him, pursue kingdom living. But what about in the meantime, when we need earthly things? We've talked a lot about treasure, which is more of an idea of accumulating things over time. What do we do in the meantime when we need earthly things to survive? What about those things? What if I don't feel like I'm someone who can even think of treasures because I just don't make enough? Well, next week we are going to talk about our basic needs. So stay tuned for that. But I want to leave you with 3 questions this morning. The first is, will you audit and revalue your life and your treasures? Practical translation, do a budget. Make it your spiritual exercise. Secondly, will you fix your eyes on Jesus? What does that mean? Study and imitate his life. We have 4 Gospels, 4 accounts of Jesus' life. There's plenty of content. And finally, will you resolve to invest in heavenly treasure over earthly treasure? Let's pray. Lord, please help us to digest what Jesus has said and apply it to our lives. This text takes aim at our core, the heart. Only you can transform our hearts. So transform our hearts so that we might treasure you and your heavenly treasures over all earthly treasures. And we pray this in the mighty name of the servant King, Jesus Christ. Amen.